Hello, everybody, and welcome to a podcast which is dedicated to the topic of humor and human rights. And what an exciting topic it is. I would like to welcome my guests for this topic. They are Veronique Lerch, who's an independent human rights consultant and currently based in Lisbon. Greetings to Portugal, Veronique. Then we have Andrea Hurst, who's a professor of philosophy at the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. Hello, Andrea.
Hi.
Hi. And we have Massih Zekavat, who's a researcher and postdoc fellow at the University of Groningen. And he's also an author of 2 books on a topic which is very closely connected to what we are talking about. And that is satire, humor, and environmental crises, and satire, humor, and the construction of identities. Hello, Massih.
Hi, great to be here.
Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Lukáš Houdek, and I work for an organization which is called Zdravotní Clown in the Czech Republic. It is a partner organization of the Red Noses International company, which of course focuses on healthcare clowning. So our topic today is humor and human rights. Now, it is an exciting topic, as I said. It is also somehow hard to make the connection, I think, mentally. It is not the most natural connection between these 2 topics. So my first question would be fairly personal, and it is to all our guests. And the question is, what role does humor play in your personal and professional life? And may I start with you, Massih, since I left you till the very end in the beginning?
Yeah, sure. So I started researching humor and satire when I was still an undergraduate student, and then I continued with the topic in my graduate studies and then in my postdoc projects. So I guess in a way I earned my living through humor and satire. And of course, in order to be able to do that, I have to keep abreast of the creative developments going on in the field. So I also consume a lot of humor and satire almost on a daily basis.
Nice. So you're a consumer of humor. That's a nice way of putting it. It's just having a laugh, essentially, I suppose. Professionally, of course, as we all do. Andrea, what would be your personal and professional connection to humor?
Well, my profession is philosophy, and instead of teaching critical thinking, I believe we should be teaching complexity thinking, which is basically critical thinking with a sense of humor. So I think humor is at the bottom of philosophizing well, although philosophers are never funny. At a personal level, I think humor mostly plays the role of a coping mechanism. Which only works if you can find exactly the right distance between what you and what is troubling you. And sometimes you just can't. And then I think humor is just not appropriate. Yeah, that's it.
We'll talk more about that later. Can you think of any philosopher who might be at least a bit funny? When you mention his or her name, it would kind of at least raise a smile.
Nietzsche.
He would be the typical example. Yes. Why Nietzsche?
He sometimes I think is incredibly personal in his comments. I mean, I think one of the funniest things he says is that the idea of human vermin and all sorts of horrible things would be typified by his mother and sister. And so he gets down there and gets personal, and I think that's what makes him funny sometimes.
Nice. So we have Nietzsche as an example of the funny philosopher. Veronique, now it's your turn. What role does humor play in your personal and professional life?
Wow, yeah, I think it's a question that could take a long time to answer, but when I had to think a lot when you said when I said that question, I think as long as I remembered, I think humor has played a role in my life. I mean, my personal life for sure, and I think it is a little bit of a mental hygiene measure, if you want. Is it to keep my sanity and to navigate the world? I cannot think of a better way to. For me, yeah, I need to have some humor every day in my life to keep my sanity. And what I noticed as well is like it helps me a lot in my relationships, to de-escalate tensions. And I can see that with my current partner, I think, we do have serious conversation, but we never argue in a hard way, because there's always a point where one of us is going to make us laugh. And then and I was thinking about that, because I think it is something that we can bring in a professional settings. And in human rights conversation, the way we have conversation and the way we start, the way we teach, I think we need that humor to connect with each other. I think it's about our shared humanity. And maybe just to add on the professional side, because this is how we actually know each other. Lukáš and Massih, we met in this year in Italy, in Padua, where I organized a laboratory on human rights and humor, because I really believe that human rights would benefit from having humor used as a tool for the promotion of human rights, for raising awareness, for education, for advocacy. So it was an interesting conversation that I hope, and I'm glad we're having this opportunity to continue the conversation. But I do think it's an important topic, and the laboratory came up as a topic out of a podcast episode I did with a human rights activist who is becoming more and more a stand-up comedian. No, actually, she told me not to say stand-up comedian, just comedian. But yeah, that's my shortness.
Started with a podcast, and it comes back round to a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. It started as a podcast, and we're finishing the year.
Nice. I hope we don't waste all our energies making podcasts. We also have time to do some things around, but this is a really nice opportunity to get together and to talk about the topic. Now, as for me, I've spent the last 22 years being a humor professional. Being a clown, of course, you cannot really avoid humor, even though one of the first rules of clowning is do not look for humor. You look for seriousness, and that's how humor happens. But my life has been so filled with humor for the past 2 decades or more that I'm looking forward to moving on to the second part of our topic, which is human rights, to the more serious stuff, but not forgetting humor at the same time. So maybe we now dive into the questions that we have prepared for you. Veronique, the first question goes to you. Would you say that humor can be used as a tool to raise awareness about human rights issues? And if so, what are the benefits and risks of doing so?
Yeah, I mean, I think I started answering already a little bit in my previous answer, but I think so. There is an author that I really like that is called Saul Alinsky. He wrote a book called The Rules for Radicals, and he explained, the way humor is an essential tactic for activists. So, and that was written in the 70s, I think, this book. And I think we kind of forgot the lessons he was giving us. And I think what and some authors now have come back to it, but it's still not explored enough. And I think what humor gives us is access to creativity. It's an opportunity also to break barriers, to bring us closer together. And I think Andrea was talking about complexity, and I think it opens the doors to complex issues. And I think we can see it with political satire from a lot of the satire comedy shows. It is an opportunity you're opening the doors. It creates an interest, but then you can go into the seriousness afterwards. But it opens doors, and I also believe that it builds communities. And it's essential for us to be working together. I cannot think of, I think, you need, working on human rights is very if you do it for a long time, it's very tiring and exhausting, and you need to have tactics that bring you joy as well. And I think it's essential to, nobody is like, oh, let's go and write a letter. That's going to be fun. And that you would keep the energy of doing this for years and years and without becoming bitter. And I think bitterness never, we know now from all the information we have in terms of neuroscience that it doesn't bring you to action. So we need that connection between humor, hope, and joy.
Mhm. There's a lot of talk about satire in connection between humor and human rights. Would you say that satire is the only type of humor, or the most typical type of humor that would be used in human rights? Or would there be space also for other types of humor? And I can see Massih already thinking intensely, because I think he also might have something to say about this.
Oh, for
So
sure.
Veronique,
You should. I will pass the ball to Massih because he can talk about the other types of humor. But I think you're a clown, and I think we can see examples of clowns, promoting human rights. And actually, just in the terrible news we've seen in the last weeks, coming from Israel and Palestine. What comes to my mind now is a clown, and is a clown from Israel protecting Palestinian communities with a clowning. And I think that's an incredible way to use humor and, bringing humor and appeasing tension and bringing humor in a situation where you would never expect it. And basically managing to appease a little bit the situation.
yes, you're right. That is very much also a part of our job in the hospitals. I mean, a hospital would also not be considered a typical place for humor, and yet it is a place where human rights also have a role to play. Of course, there's a right to health. There's right to leisure time. There's right to play, and this is also these would be the topics that we would be addressing in our job. Massih, satire. Why would satire feature so prominently when we talk about humor and human rights?
Thank you for the question. So I think one potential answer is that satire is a tool to speak truth to power. So this is the term that was used in ancient Greek, Parrhesia. Satire has parrhesic potentials, that is to say, it could be used as a discourse to speak truth to power. Now, so the point of satire is to speak to power. That is to say, in terms of stand-up comedy, you punch up. You target somebody who is more powerful than you. But normally you do not punch down because, well, there's no point, because people who are less powerful than you as a satirist, they cannot really change the situation. So you're aiming for somebody who is more powerful. You aim to speak truth to power. In that sense, satire is a way to challenge authority and power, and hopefully to renegotiate power relationships. So satire is indeed dominant in talking about human rights, but it does not necessarily mean that it is the exclusive kind of humor that could be used.
I guess that's a fair enough description of also the punching up that you mentioned is something that stand-up comedians often do. The difference between stand-up comedians and clowns, now that I think of it, is that clowns are always the ones taking the punches. It's like they never punch at all. That would be the basis of clown humor. Veronique, wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think Massih made a very important point, and you were asking what are the caveats of of using humor for human rights. And I think this punching down or punching up is really important, because you can also reinforce stereotypes by using humor.
Yes, and I can Sorry. Would you like to finish?
No, I think Andrea at the point.
Exactly, because I can see Andrea nodding, and she knows that this is the question that we have prepared for her. So speaking of caveats in using humor in the field of human rights, what would they be in your opinion?
There are two that I can think of that, and you know, philosophers unfortunately always look at the dark side. Maybe not always, but one of them seems to be that the horror of gross human rights violations just seems to outweigh the power of humor, even satire. So you just can't create the right distance, and this kind of silences humor. I think I would like to be educated about this by the clowns, but South Africa's best known satirical cartoonist Zapiro often kind of uses humor for or uses satire for human rights advocacy. But facing the Israel-Palestine conflict, he just left us with a blank space. That's the cartoon that you can see on you know, on whatever side this is. It's a series of post-it notes, and even if you can't read the writing, it shows why for him satire in that circumstance is impossible. It's impossible to create the right distance from the horrors of that event, and it leaves satire silenced. So I think that is a caveat that bothers me a lot, is are there sometimes horrors that you just simply cannot approach with humor? A Zimbabwean colleague of mine, Vulindlela Nyoni, pointed out to me that Zapiro, the same satirist, did actually use humor against one of the most horrific events in contemporary South Africa, and that's the xenophobic attacks. So I'm a bit uncomfortable speaking about Vulindlela's work and about xenophobia in South Africa. I mean, I prefer to hear this kind of thing from him, but I mean, he can't be here, so he did ask me to go ahead and speak about it. So basically the contrast between the two cartoons that I've put up here speaks to a second caveat, and I think it's a really important one. It's that humor can be so powerful, can have such a powerful emotional effect, especially if it works at this visceral level of images, and it risks going really badly wrong and reinforcing exactly what you want to challenge, the stereotypes. So just to give you a little bit of context, the name that most evokes this horror of South African xenophobia is Ernesto Namave. He was kind of titled the Burning Man, and he was just an ordinary Mozambican construction worker who was attacked just because of his foreignness, set alight during the brutal xenophobic attacks of 2008, and he was burned to death. And since then, hundreds of foreign nationals have been murdered, thousands have been injured, and hundreds of thousands have been violated by ongoing kind of intimidation, eviction, extortion, theft. So maybe because this cartoon of Zapiro's tries to deal with a horror that's beyond humor, I think that his depiction is a kind of satire that just goes wrong. The cartoon means to depict this foreigner in the degrading way that he's seen by the South Africans. And the South Africans are meant to be depicted as monstrous in the eyes of outsiders. But we only really know this by the ironic text. And the ironic text is in English. So blindly xenophobic South Africans wouldn't have enough command of Zapiro's specific satirical language to get the irony, but they could have a strong emotional identification with the imagery, where it would be seen without irony, and it would offer a kind of sense of pleasurable justification. there's a lot of the kind of imagery of the South Africans celebrating. There's a lot of that kind of imagery that you see when you are celebrating a victory, a justifiable victory of protests and actually winning the protest. And that's the kind of imagery that you see there, next to this abject body of the foreigner. And I think that this is an example of how human rights advocacy through satirical humor can actually go wrong and contribute to the harm. So yeah, that would be what I think those are two main caveats that I would think of.
Thank you. Would any of you maybe say that, so we now have heard examples of like horrors that are kind of beyond humor, that you cannot really use humor to address them in any way. Would you say it is possible for the people on the other side of this horror, for the people who are actually suffering a lot of mistreatment or a lot of tragedy, would you say that they might be allowed to use humor to express themselves and to talk about the tragedy that befell them? Would you say this would be acceptable in the field of humor and human rights? I can see you nodding. Massih, would you have something to say?
Sure. I can think of, off the top of my head, I can think of at least 3 examples. 1 week after 9/11, Jon Stewart ran his show again. He was still hosting The Daily Show, and he cracked jokes about 9/11. 1 week after the attacks on WTO Twin Towers. The second example is Charlie Hebdo. After the massacre, Charlie Hebdo responded with humor. The next issue that was published actually was humorous. Well, it was dark humor, needless to say, but still. And the third example I can think of is the case of Viktor Frankl, who was a Jewish psychologist who actually experienced the horrors of concentration camps. And in his book, 𝐂𝐫𝐞𝐝𝐤𝐿, In Search of the Meaning of Life, he insists that people who were suffering in concentration camps regularly used humor in order to survive the situation, to transcend the situation, and then survive.
Yes, I think I can add to this by saying that in the healthcare clown world, you often meet a lot of humor at the most serious departments, and it's like people there suffering from cancer or their children suffering from some kind of very, very long-term illnesses. You can see how they enjoy having the freedom of joking about the seriousness of their situation. But of course, we would not feel entitled to make fun of their situation in any way. Now, since time is running short, I think we will slowly begin to conclude the topic. And Veronique, I'll start with you now. Would you have 1 or 2 sentences to sum up, if you were asked, what do humor and human rights have in common? And I know I'm pressuring you into 2 sentences, and I know it is impossible, but for people who see them as 2 completely different fields, how would you explain to them that they are actually very well connected in a catchy way, possibly, for the listeners or viewers of our discussion, so that they get motivated?
Well, you're asking a lot now. in a catchy way. I think just maybe linked to the discussion we just had, I think it's a lot about, yes, the 2 are connected, and humor is a powerful tool for advancing human rights, but it needs to be done in the right way, which is difficult. You need to be, and I think if we had more time, I think what we would need to talk about is, like, of course, humor is a skill that needs practice, and you as a clown, you know that very well because you take your work very seriously. And I think we can bring more humor, but we need to practice it. And we can't just, make a joke about those serious violations, because it is very painful and difficult. And actually, I can think of two comedians who managed to use humor in the last months regarding Israel and Palestine, like Bassem Youssef, who is the Egyptian Jon Stewart, as he called himself sometimes, and Wally Dia, a French comedian. And it is possible, but it requires a lot of talent. It depends on the context, who is telling the joke, and what is the objective, and are you punching up? So I think, yes, it's important to make us laugh because it mobilizes, it helps to keep a critical lens on injustice, and it also gives us hope, and we need a hope, and to find a way to deal with human rights violation.
Veronique, you were talking about, you were trying to sum up the topic at hand, which I know is an impossible task, and I can see Andrea and Massih already looking forward to giving it a go. How do you provide a summary of so vast a field? But I want to ask you one more thing. You yourself do a podcast, which you mentioned before in the discussion. Would you like to make a little advertisement for this podcast? Because I know it is very closely connected to human rights.
Yeah, thank you, Lukáš. So yeah, this the podcast is called The Road Less Traveled, and it is about talking about people who are doing human rights in an unexpected way. So not for instance, using humor, but also maybe dancing, music, maybe working for the private sector. So we look at different ways you can do human rights, and that's why there is a link with humor, and this is why we actually started doing we did the laboratory on humor and human rights. And so yeah, thank you for mentioning the podcast. So yeah, like a summary of this conversation. I think that humor is a powerful tool to advance human rights. I think it can be used for education, for advocacy, for raising awareness. As we just discussed, it needs to be done the right way, in an ethical way. It's all about the context. Who is making the joke? Are you punching down? Are you punching up? As Massih explained. But basically, yeah, I strongly believe that a good activist is somebody who is able to make us laugh at the right point, to be able to mobilize and to keep the focus on injustice and break barriers, as I mentioned before, but also give us the hope that we need to continue the work, the essential work that we need to do to advance human rights.
Thank you, Andrea. And maybe I will be a bit more specific with the question now. Do you think it is possible to use humor both ways, which means in one way to promote human rights, maybe to engage humor in activism on behalf of human rights, but also to use humor as not against oneself, but in the sense of making fun of oneself, because these are two different things, aren't they? It's like, we can make fun because satire is usually directed outwards. It's like you really are kind of making fun of something. For me, for clowns in general, I think humor is much more self-centered, not in terms of being egoistic, but actually in the completely different direction, in the sense of how can I make fun of myself as much as possible so that other people can laugh. Do you think it is possible to connect these two approaches to humor?
Another huge question.
Another huge question, yes.
I think it probably has to do with the capacity to create the right distance between the event and yourself in order to be able to make fun of yourself. I don't think that my colleague, for instance, could make fun of the xenophobic attacks, even though he's just not at the right distance from it, nor can I. There's nothing in it that allows me to feel in any sense a feeling of humor. I feel ill rather than and I think that we are not at the right distance from this event. Maybe we never will be, but if you can create the right distance, yes, you can laugh at yourself and be laughed at. And that would be, I think, very healthy. But I still do think that there are some events that go beyond humor, that humor just cannot, it doesn't have a place there. I might be completely wrong about that, though. I very much like the idea of humor having an element of hope to it. Yeah, okay.
Humor is a famously evasive topic, I think. You can approach it from so many different angles, and it demonstrates itself in so many different ways. Now, Massih, not the same question to you, but a similar question to you. If you were to sum up how humor and human rights, I mean, they sound similar, but we have to make a bit of an effort to connect the two. So how would you build the bridge between the two so that it would make the most sense to the people who are listening to us and looking at us?
Thank you. So I do believe that humor is the road less traveled by, and I do believe that humor has affordances that have been largely disregarded. So I think the human rights activists should actually embrace the affordances of humor and satire for advocacy. Of course, humor should be used wisely. We've been talking about this. And on the other side, I also think that researchers must engage with more practical uses of humor and satire and learn from and closely collaborate with practitioners. I have the honor and privilege of working with you, Lukáš and Veronique, as practitioners of humor. This is, I think, what you are partly doing in facilitating through this podcast. So very much appreciated. Thank you for that.
Just a note, I'm not a practitioner of humor. I would like to be, but I think Lukáš is definitely. I'm a practitioner of human rights with a willingness to be a practitioner of humor.
I was when you mentioned it, Massih, I was looking at Veronique, and if you can, if the people who are watching this can play it back, you can see this moment of, and then the very, very, very small motion of the head, like,
I like it.
not
I like
really.
it. I mean, it's definitely, there's a will there, but I still have a lot to practice. But yeah.
Well, I'm happy that yes, Massih wants to add something.
I think you're one of the best humored people I've ever met. So,
oh, thank you.
I would definitely agree, and I'm happy that we had quite a lot of laughter during this discussion. I mean, for me as a clown, of course, it is the greatest gift, and it's everything that we try to elicit through our work is really is human laughter. So I think it's symptomatic of the discussion that we were able to laugh quite a lot, even though we were talking about a very serious topic. I would like to thank you all again for joining us for this discussion, and I hope it's not the last time that we meet, and that we will continue in further discussion on this topic. Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you very much, Veronique. Thank you very much, Massih. It was a pleasure to have you in this discussion.